I was born in Lackawanna, New York, the 8th of 11 children of Ashley and Annie Hargrave. My mom and both my parents came from Halifax, North Carolina. My dad founded the first black business in Lackawanna, in Hargrave Cleaners. He started in 1924. And it evolved and it spread in Lackawanna, and then it spread to Buffalo. And at one time, we owned 9 different cleaners. There was one on Jefferson, there was one on Genesee, one on Broadway, one on Sycamore. And there was one on Ridge Road in Lackawanna, one on Steelawana, one on Ingham Avenue in Lackawanna, but there were quite a few cleaners. My father was successful. He was a very hard-working man. I never knew my father not to work 2 jobs. I never knew, and I never understood why he worked so hard and worked 2 jobs all the time. His business was one, and then he worked for Bethlehem Steel. He was one of the first black foremen there. And then he ended up at Wurlitzer, and he stayed there until he retired and he didn't retire until he was like 75 years old. But he was good. My father was strong. He was stern. He brought us up to believe in God and what God could do. My father was a deacon in the Baptist church. He taught Bible for 31 years. And for 11 years, I studied Bible in the Greek and Hebrew texts with LaRue Bradley, Reverend LaRue Bradley. And when my dad died in 1981, Reverend Bradley called me and he said, "You've picked up your father's mantle." Well, at that point in my life, I didn't want anything to do with anything that had to do with my father, because he and I didn't get along too well. And I guess that was because we were too much alike. When I really started to think about it, and when I really looked into myself to see what I was doing and why I was doing what I was doing, everything was to prove my father wrong about things when he told me, you'll never amount to anything, you'll never do anything. And my mantra was, I'll show you, I'll show you. I said, 2 of your daughters went to nursing school, didn't they? But I'm the only one that finished. And I love nursing. I love taking care of people. And I guess I've done that for most of my life. I enjoy writing. I enjoy reading. I do a lot of work with my church. Right now, I suggest to my pastor what scriptures we should concentrate on. And right now, we're in the book of Daniel. And we're doing the first 2 chapters because Pastor didn't want to overwhelm people. I usually do 4 chapters at a time when I do the questions. Because what it is, I said to him one day, I said, "Pastor, it's okay for you to get on and lecture, but as soon as you get off the phone, they've forgotten what you said, and they haven't even thought anything about it. But if they have to work, and they have to find the answers to questions that are in the scriptures we're talking about, then they're more likely to retain it than they are from just hearing a lecture. Because I know how I am when I hear a lecture, I can forget it." I was born on March 6, 1935. I'm 87 years old. I think one of the most important things to me is my church and that community. That's where I work, that's where my heart is. I do a lot with people. For instance, I pick up people and take them to church if they can't get there themselves. I picked up a friend of mine out in East Amherst Sunday to take her to church and take her back home. And I have another friend that I pick up usually every Sunday. I take Margie home and pick her up every Sunday, but I have to call her on Saturday night and say, "Are you going to church?" and she'll tell me whether or not she's going, and I pick her up and take her. But I enjoy doing these kinds of things. I enjoy, and most of all, I have grandchildren, I have great-grandchildren. I see my great-grands being brought up in the church, in the YPD, just as my daughter was. And I see her doing some of the same things I taught her. She's taught her children, and they are now teaching their children. And they know the family history like nobody else. My grandsons can recite Daughter Be Somebody almost verbally. They can tell you who was what, who lived where, and if you're talking about somebody in the family, oh, that was Grandma Lanny, or oh, that was Ma Mitty. They know the family's history, and that makes me feel very important, because many times in schools, they would tell their teachers about my books, and the teachers would have me come in and talk to the class about my books and how to preserve your family's history. And I think that's one of the most important things. We need to know where we came from and how we got here. And how did my father have the insight and the courage to do what he did? You know, after World War I, my dad was in World War I. He came home, and he and my mother were married in 1920. They were married 61 years when my father died. And none of the grandchildren have made 61 years. We haven't even made 50 years. But what we were taught moves on from generation to generation, because I see my grandson now teaching his son. And when he was telling me what he was teaching him, I said, what about the Bible? And that's his book he goes to bed with. His name is Ashton, and they live in Texas. But Ashton asks for his Bible book to go to bed with. And his mother reads to him from the Bible every night. And that to me is so important, because it gives children a path. It gives them a road to travel. And you've left some lights along the way so that they can see where they're going. Just as my forebears left lights for me. And because I thought so much of them, I had to write about their lives. And now I need to bring it up to date, because the last time I wrote was in 1997. So now I'm attempting now to move into the present and bring it from 97 to now, because I know that if I don't do it, I don't think anybody else is interested enough. I have a nephew in California and one in Washington, D.C. who might be interested, but not enough to write about it. I get up and I count my steps every day. I have to do, for myself, I have to do at least 3,000 steps a day. Getting older and not being able to do the things that I used to do, and knowing that I can't do what I used to do, and accepting it, and doing what I can do at my age. And that's more than a lot of people. The other thing is watching your friends and family pass away. I'm one of 11 children, and there are only 3 of us left. I have 1 brother and 1 sister left. My sister is 89. My brother's 79. But he has done so much. He has been to Halifax, North Carolina, which is the home of both of our parents, and he has spent a fortune on getting trees cut down in the cemeteries, getting the cemeteries cleaned up, and even the cemetery that was behind our home. There are 6 graves back there, and he has made it simply beautiful. I put the pictures on Facebook, I believe, of the white fence that he put around those 6 graves, and he's having that cemetery registered. And it'll be called the Whitehead Cemetery, and it was established in 1896. That's when the first body went in, 1896. I say there are 6 graves. My brother just told me he found another grave, and I said, well, that has to be Grandpa Whitehead's sister, Aunt Jane, because I haven't been able to find her anywhere else. And I know that when she came back to Halifax, she lived with my grandparents, and that she died there. So I figure she probably is that 7th grave they found. But it's been to see my brother so excited about what he's doing, because we still own the Hargrave property in North Carolina. He pays the taxes. He goes down 3 or 4 times a year. And in fact, he goes down there to me more than is necessary, but he's always down there making sure the grass is cut and that there's nothing growing up around 3 cemeteries. And he pays people to keep the grass cut and keep it cut down and keep the brush that was around my father's house where my dad was born. He keeps that cut down. He keeps that so the house is visible. Before you can tell anybody anything, you need to know who you are, where you came from, how you made it, how did your ancestors make it. And the job that they did, that we're trying to keep going through. I don't argue about race. I've just found, I told you I had my DNA done. Believe that there is a God and that He is looking out for you. I think young people, I see so many that I know when they were younger, and I see them as adults, and I ask, why don't you go to church? I don't feel like it. What do you mean you don't feel like it? And I talk to a lot of young people. I talk to a lot of homeless people too. And I ask them, don't you know that God will make a way? He'll make a way for you out of no way if you just believe. I think young people need to stop looking at guns, and there's so much violence on television. There's so much violence. I know I see a whole lot of new programs coming up, and they're all about war. They're all about shooting. And then you see the advertising on TV. They're advertising these guns, rifles on TV. And I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think that sitting in front of the TV for young people is a good thing. I think they need to be taught to do something else, read. I remember my grandmother, when my brother was telling me how when they'd go to North Carolina, we went to North Carolina every summer and stayed with my mother's family. And my brother said that he didn't want to go outside and play, and the boys were out, other boys were playing. And he'd say, well, my grandmother would tell him, well, Bill, you're not going to sit here and do nothing. Here's a book. You read it, and then we'll talk about it. That's a good thing. He always said my grandmother gave him a love for the written word. And my mom and my grandmother did the same things for me. And my mother would tell me all the time, well, Florence, write it down. And I said, but Ma, I don't know how. She said, yes, you do, you know how. I didn't think I had any writing ability until I went to college. And I did a paper on alcoholism, a disease, not a crime. And it was published, and I was shocked. And my instructor came to me and he said, you have a gift. And I said, for what? He said, for writing. But I'm very grateful for that gift right now. And I talk to my children, my grandchildren, my great-grands. I'm teaching my great-granddaughters how to crochet. My grandmother taught me, my father's mother taught me how to crochet. And I've done a lot of it. And when Bella, my eldest grandchild, came to me, she said, Nanny, I want you to teach me how to crochet. And I thought, she's 11. I was 7 when Grandma taught me. This is good. She wants something that she sees me doing. She wants to be able to do. And it's something that keeps them out of the streets. My father used to tell us there's nothing good in the streets after 11 o'clock. So you be in this house by 11. And if you weren't, you paid the price. It's been great. It's been great seeing you again. And knowing that you're still working on Uncrowned Queens, because I think that is something everybody should know about. I think there are so many good things in there. I believe I've gone through and read almost everybody in there. I've gone through and read their histories. Even my sister, who was in there, Reverend Penn. I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing, and I hope that you will continue.